Berlin. After 5 years of conflict, it looks as if Aleppo is about to fall to the Syrian government. Thousands of civilians flee as the Syrian regime pushes to capture the entire city. We'll hear what that means for people still trapped inside. Also on the programme, a first in Germany as a court upholds a prison sentence for a 95-year-old man who aided Nazi genocide without killing anyone himself. We'll hear more on what that ruling means for future prosecutions. And the Grand Masters of tomorrow, Russia hopes that students at an elite chess academy will make the country proud. We'll introduce you to their next generation of players. I'm Phil Gale. Welcome to the programme. We begin with the latest developments in the Syrian city of Aleppo, where troops loyal to President Assad have retaken a large part of the rebel enclave. Monitors say almost a third of it has fallen to government forces over the past 2 days, forcing thousands of civilians to flee. Syrian government forces, backed by Russian airstrikes, have laid siege to rebel-held eastern Aleppo for months.
Empty streets, burned-out buildings, rubble everywhere. This is what it looks like when half a city flees. Thousands of civilians, including an estimated 800 children, are running away from the relentless violence in eastern Aleppo as the Syrian army wrestles to regain the city from rebel hands. London-based monitors say the latest onslaught of bombs and grenades has killed more than 350 people, though these claims are difficult to verify. They followed us with weapons and started to shoot and shout at us. Then they hit a man behind us and 2 were killed. We had 2 choices, either die or run away. UN Special Envoy for Syria, Staffan de Mistura, says Aleppo could fall by Christmas, forcing thousands more to flee. The humanitarian situation in the city is already catastrophic. According to the Red Cross, food supplies have almost run out. There's no more fuel left to heat or cook. Hundreds remain trapped. Capturing Aleppo from rebel hands would be a key victory for Syrian President Bashar al-Assad after 5.5 years of war.
Let's get more on this from Sanj Srikathan, who is Deputy Executive Director of the International Rescue Committee, that's the IRC, in London. He joins us by phone. Welcome to DW. What does this latest development, what are your thoughts on this latest development with the Syrian army apparently retaking Aleppo?
Well, I think the siege has got up to its crescendo, and what we're seeing now is really a tightening of control by the Syrian government in Aleppo. The result, though, is that 350,000 civilians in East Aleppo are in a very difficult situation. They don't know where they can go, where they can move safely, and they need to be treated as civilians by both sides as the fighting intensifies in the city.
Now, well, we've talked in our news about thousands trying to flee as this push goes on. Many people would ask themselves, why are they still there?
So the people of Aleppo, it's been their home all these years, and it's very hard to uproot yourself and take yourself somewhere. People think refugees, it's the easiest thing to do, and why do they to Europe? The reality is, it's the hardest thing to do, and the first choice of most people is to stay where they know their lives mean something and they have their possessions and their family. But they've been taking increasingly greater risks now that the fighting is coming into eastern Aleppo, into the streets where they've lived, where children have been playing amongst the rubble. They're left with no choice, and it's a question of where are they going to go, and are we as an international community going to facilitate a safe movement for civilians out of that zone?
So how do you anticipate life changing for civilians if Aleppo ends up being controlled by government forces rather than by rebels?
Well, that's a good question. Many of the civilians have been living in rebel-controlled areas, have got identification and documents that have been given to them by these non-state groups, and the government of Syria may well not accept these, and we must ask that all sides respect the fact that civilians have to obey local laws and the groups that control their area. So we need to get identification. We need to get a return to normalcy for civilians, services up and running, running water. Many of the people who've been bombed no longer have running water, food, and above all, we need humanitarians to be able to reach the population. And we can't make any summary judgments about who's a combatant and who's a civilian without a proper process.
Good to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining DW. Sanj Srikathan from the International Rescue Committee.
Thank you.
Now, Germany's highest court has upheld the conviction of the man who's become known as the bookkeeper of Auschwitz. In July 2015, a lower court convicted 95-year-old Oskar Gröning of being an accessory to mass murder and sentenced him to 4 years in prison. As well as being one of the last trials of its kind, this trial broke new legal ground because Gröning didn't directly participate in any killings. Instead, he was part of the administrative apparatus of the Auschwitz death camp. DW political correspondent Simon Young joins us for more on this story. Welcome, Simon. Explain to us why this ruling is so important.
Well, Phil, this is the latest stage in the legal process of working through the Nazis' crimes. And of course, many people will say that it's extraordinary that that process is still unfolding more than 70 years after the end of the Second World War. But the fact is that during the first trials of people accused of involvement in the Nazi death camps, the legal principle was that people could only be prosecuted if they were actually directly involved in the killing itself, and not on the basis of lower involvement as administrators or indeed as lowly camp guards. And that principle, that idea, has now been overturned because the court today has said that Oskar Gröning's conviction in part rests on his supporting role at Auschwitz. So that changes things. It was a principle, incidentally, that was already stated in the case of John Demjanjuk a few years ago, but he died before he could go to jail. So this is, if you like, a significant legal step forward.
So now that the rules have shifted, does this mean that prosecutions that were dropped previously will now be picked up? Are we likely to see now more prosecutions going ahead?
Well, more prosecutions were planned in any case, whatever happened in this ruling. But I think this will mean that prosecutors proceed now with more confidence than before. There are still a few surviving people alleged of involvement in the crimes in the Nazi death camps who will be brought before the courts. And the fact is that it's been made clear that there's no defence of saying, well, I was there, but I didn't actually kill anyone myself. Now, I think prosecutors will be encouraged to proceed more vigorously against the few remaining people that there are.
Oskar Gröning is 95 years old. Will he go to jail?
Well, that ultimately depends on his state of health. His lawyer has said that he'll try some kind of appeal, but really I think it's up to the authorities whether they decide that Oskar Gröning, old man that he is actually fit to face jail.
Simon Young, thank you. Crowds are gathering in Havana as a week-long farewell to Fidel Castro gets underway. Cuba's veteran president and revolutionary leader died last week at the age of 90, 10 years after he stepped down from power. Now, these are live pictures from Havana's Revolution Square, where the first memorial event is starting. Thousands of Cubans are lining up to file through a monument in the square. Despite Castro being such a controversial figure, his critics have pledged to keep quiet during the mourning period. To France now, and the man who says he will scrap the country's 35-hour working week and crack down on immigration is the new favourite to become the next president. François Fillon has won the Conservative primaries and will stand for election in May. The former Prime Minister will take on the governing Socialists as well as the far-right's Marine Le Pen.
The narrative twisted again. After François Fillon's unexpected win in the Conservative primaries, the far-right National Front now has to face an opponent whose views overlap in part with its own visions. 2 weeks ago, Fillon was the dark horse in a race that looked all but sewn up for the more centrist former Prime Minister, Alain Juppé. It is my duty to beat the inaction and the demagoguery. The left means failure. The far right means bankruptcy. I'm talking about beating these political parties, not beating the disappointed French people, the voters who aren't ours today, but who it's now my job to lead towards the future. Despite political similarities, Front National leaders say Fillon will not get the backing of the French people. He has a program, which he completely takes responsibility for, which perhaps does him credit, that is so sharply different from ours, and is a program that is very harsh and cannot bring together a majority of the French people. Fillon has pitched himself as a radical free market reformer, vowing to slash public funding. He is also an advocate of getting rid of the 35-hour work week and eliminating public sector jobs. Despite the enthusiasm of his supporters, Front National says these policies will not succeed. France is now looking ahead to 2017, and in the wake of Brexit and the U.S. elections, nothing should be taken for granted.
For the World Chess Championships in New York, they're looking at an exciting showdown between reigning champion Magnus Carlsen of Norway and Russia's Sergei Karyakin. With 5.5 points each, a win tonight for either player will decide the championship. Sergei Karyakin was only 12.5 years old when he became a grandmaster, and that's inspiring a new generation of prodigies in Russia, where chess is enjoying a surge in popularity not seen since the Soviet era.
Hello, my name is Igor Borsov.
My name is Matthew Tsoi. My name is Sasha Naumova. My name is Valeria Istaykin.
They're tough and determined to reach the top. Igor and his fellow students want to take on the world, the chess world. And their parents are happy to pay for it by sending them here, to the Russian chess school in Moscow. Chess makes you smart. It calms you. I like to think, calculate, and make my moves. Chess is logical. Chess is universal. A 70-year-old academic can play a 6-year-old child, and either could win. That brings people together, all over the world. But not always. In 1972, American Bobby Fischer faced off against Boris Spassky of the Soviet Union. It was dubbed the match of the century, a political power game in the midst of the Cold War. That was then. Today, 7 international grandmasters train the 80 students at the Moscow Chess School. They might be young in years, but many have already won tournaments in Moscow and around the country. Chess is back as a national sport, and so is the prestige, something even the youngest player knows.
Chess tournaments like this were one of the Soviet Union's favorite tools to demonstrate socialism's superiority over corrupt Western countries. Socialism may have disappeared, but the decadent West is still around.
At least in the minds of many Russians. The current World Championship in New York pits Russia's own Sergei Karjakin against Norwegian Magnus Carlsen. But is it a clash of East versus West? Chess was one of the best traditions of the former Soviet Union. So it's good to see that tradition make a resurgence. But whether it's as political as it was back then, I don't think so. But it is a return to traditional values. After being buffeted by doping scandals and corruption allegations, the classic board game of chess just might restore some of the shine to Russian sports.
As a reminder of our top stories of this hour, Syria's government says it has retaken control of a key part of eastern Aleppo, presenting opposition forces with their biggest setback for years and causing thousands of residents to flee. That's it. You're up to date. More at the top of the hour. Have a good day.